Welcome to Mid-Century Living, your weekly nostalgia podcast about the best of technology and culture from the mid-20th century.
Welcome to episode 39 of Mid-Century Living, the show where we talk all about the best of the mid-20th century and how to add the vintage vibes to your modern life. We are your hosts, Gonzalo
and Jackie. Thank you for joining us today. So today we're digging into the history of one of my favorite retro aesthetics, Tiki. More specifically, Tiki bars. But first, Gonzalo, how was your week?
Good. So we are recording less than 7 days before I have to be back at work. So remember, for those of you who maybe just tuned in this episode or episode or two ago, I'm a teacher and then it's middle of summer. So yay. But summer's come to an end and the kids don't return for another month, or 3 weeks. We have 2 weeks of work stuff to do. But I'm going to go. So my team is meeting on Monday and we're going to do our classrooms and then do a little bit of planning. And I'm really excited. There's different types of teachers. One is the one that's oh my God, I can't believe I have to go back to work. And then one's super excited. And then the first year teacher who has no idea what's going on. And then there's another type of teacher, which is the one that's secretly excited for the routine and really wants to go decorate their classroom. And that's where I fit in. So that's where I am at. That's what I'll be doing this next week is that, and then enjoy my last few days of not having to wake up. I mean, I still wake up at 7 because my body's you're an adult, get up. But starting Friday, I don't get the choice. I have to be up because I have to pay my mortgage.
Right.
So.
And then you're like the rest of us who go to work every day.
But that's my week. That's what I will be doing. My previous week was just a regular week. So how was your week?
My week was fine. I started a new Instagram series. It's very brand new, so I've only done one episode so far, but I've decided to start working through my Weight Watchers recipe card library from 1971.
Which we did an episode on.
Yes, which we did an episode on that you can, if you guys want to scroll back and listen to the founding of Weight Watchers, we did a whole episode on that. It was super fun and inspired me to buy this recipe card library. And since I'm on a bit of a weight loss journey anyway, but I still really like testing vintage recipes, I decided to combine the two. So now I'm going to be testing vintage Weight Watchers recipes, and I've only done one so far, but I already have 2 more planned. Well, one of them's more 1.5. Not off to a great start. The very first recipe I tried out kind of sucked. So instead of jumping straight into another recipe, I'm going to try to tweak that one for the modern palate. So that's what I'm going to do this weekend. Fingers crossed that works out. And then I'll start doing new recipes from it maybe every other week. But I'm calling it Weight Watchers Wednesday because I like alliteration.
Nice.
And if that sounds fun, you can follow me at Thoroughly Mid-Modern on Instagram and watch me make faces while I try Weight Watchers recipes from the early 70s.
They are very amusing faces. I can confirm. I've seen. But everyone, go follow her on Instagram. And if you want to listen to our episode on Weight Watchers, we will link in the show notes.
Yes, we sure will.
But why don't we go on and get started with talking about Tiki?
Yes. So Tiki is there's just so much out there to talk about. So I tried as best as I could to kind of niche it down for the sake of time. But because there may be more Tiki purists out there, I'm trying to balance between people who really know what they're talking about with Tiki, just listening to this and smiling and being yes, I knew all of this. And also people who are new to Tiki and have no idea what's going on. So first, a little explanation that Tiki, the common phrase, actually has been rebranded now to a bigger, more umbrella term called Polynesian pop, which was coined by historian Sven Kirsten to denote the use of imagery and iconography of the South Pacific to express a desire to escape to a simpler life or a more exotic place. So, while the people usually use tiki to encompass all of that, the craze actually starts before tikis themselves became a thing that you would see in the bars. So using the term Polynesian pop encompasses everything from like pre-tiki to post-tiki and the tiki revival. So I use that phrase sometimes interchangeably in the episode.
Okay.
But the Polynesian pop or tiki craze came about in the mid-century before travel to the South Pacific was commonplace and before color film and television. As such, Polynesian pop presents an imaginary vision of the South Seas. It inspired a generation of artists and designers to create a unique mainland version of faux Polynesia, which was unique to 20th century America. A phrase I read that I really liked was authentically inauthentic. And as I mentioned, the term Polynesian pop covers even pre-tiki, and I feel like that's important to mention because the two most formative bars of the tiki craze did not actually have any tikis in them, Don the Beachcomber and Trader Vic's. So even though they're technically pre-tiki bars, that's actually the two bars we're going to focus on the bulk of this episode because their legacy is so important to the experience.
Okay, so tell me, when did the actual tiki symbol make its first appearance? If it wasn't part of these bars, the original or the most formative ones, when did it first become a thing?
So, recent evidence points to the Kahlua Room in Seattle being the first to actually have a tiki logo on its building, menu, and cocktail napkins when it opened in 1953. And already at this point, the tiki's characteristic features have become a stylized, cartoony version of real Polynesian carvings. Like I said before, it's sort of unique mainland interpretation of Polynesia is kind of the aesthetic. So, but around 1955, Trader Vic's, which was already a chain of restaurant at this point, spoiler alert for later in the episode, started using a Maori tiki, and Tiki Bob's, which was opened by an ex-employee of Vic's, used to use the tiki name, was the first to use the tiki name in conjunction with a tiki logo. So, by the mid 50s, I'd say, is when tiki symbols started coming about.
So, Jackie, maybe before, for those of us, myself included, who maybe aren't sure what a tiki is, what is the actual tiki?
So, tikis are actual real Polynesian carvings that a lot of people saw, the people who actually made it to Hawaii and Polynesia and the South Seas in their travels, which at this time was not a lot of people. It was cost prohibitive for most of Americans to get overseas. So, when the tiki itself is actually that specific carving, and when it became part of the Polynesian pop movement, it was really not historically accurate or culturally accurate tikis. They kind of would take the tiki carving style and interpret it to their own kind of logo or mascot.
Okay.
And so the reason why Kirsten made the Polynesian pop term is because he believes personally that if it says tiki on it, it should have a tiki in it. And if your bar does not have a tiki in it, it's not a tiki bar, which is why Don the Beachcomber and Trader Vic's are technically not, well, Trader Vic's is now, because they added tikis later, but when they opened, they did not have tiki statues or carvings anywhere in their bars, so they were technically not tiki bars. They are pre-tiki bars.
Okay.
So, although tiki bars as we know them now are a very mid-century phenomenon, hitting its peak in the 40s and 50s, the two most formative bars that I just mentioned actually opened in the 30s. But since they are so important for paving the way for tiki, I think any intro to tiki must include their history. So I don't think this is too much of a cheat for our time period, and that's why we're talking about them today. So before we get started, I wanted to say that almost all of the stuff that I'm about to say came from the book Smuggler's Cove by Martin Cate, which is an incredible read. Highly recommend it. It is the entire history of tiki from beginning to end, plus resources for your own home bar, how to throw a tiki party at your house, 130 cocktail recipes, a crazy rum categorization scale, anything you ever want to know. If you're going to start anywhere, I highly recommend starting with that book. So,
Wow. That sounds impressive.
It is fantastic. Do recommend.
So that first bar, Tiki, pre-Tiki bar, Don the Beachcomber. In order to talk about the bar, we're gonna talk a little bit about this guy named Ernest Raymond Besmont Gannett, which is a mouthful. And he was born in 1907 and grew up in New Orleans. And his grandfather had an import-export business that turned into the importing of Jamaican rum during Prohibition. Well, is the statute of limitations over for that?
I
Because
don't
he just
know. I put import export in quotes.
So sorry, family, if we ousted you. But anyway, he traveled to the Caribbean with his grandfather a lot during this time. And when he turned 18, his parents gave him the choice of either going to college or take his college money and use it as he saw fit. And wow. Like, if my parents had done that, I don't know how I would have answered at 18.
I would have answered it the same way he did, probably.
Which was, they decided to take the money and run. So Besmont spent the next several years traveling the seas to the Caribbean, to South Pacific, and beyond, where he visited dozens of islands and immersed himself in the food, drink, and culture of the islands. When he eventually ran out of money, he finally settled down in Los Angeles, bringing tons of souvenirs from his travels with him. And in 1933, he bought a 13 by 30 foot room in Hollywood, turned it into a bar, and changed the course of American cocktail culture, dining, and design for the next 40 years. And this is where Don's Beachcomber Cafe and Don the Beachcomber come into play. So it is named for a pseudonym that Ernest had once used while bootlegging. This bar was nothing like the elegant, tropical-themed nightclubs of the time. Instead, it was a small, little rough around the edges and unassuming from the outside. There was just a small driftwood sign on the gate that read Don's Beachcomber. But the inside was fully immersive and decorated with everything he'd collected on his travels. The Beachcomber was just a few steps from busy Hollywood Boulevard, but it made the patrons feel like they'd escaped time and place. And of course, what's a bar without drinks, right? So the drinks were really what made this place history. He expanded on everything he'd learned and tasted during his travels, and in the process created an entirely new category of cocktail. He started with centuries-old Planter's Punch, a recipe immortalized across the Caribbean with the rhyme 1 of sour, 2 of sweet, 3 of strong, 4 of weak. He built on these 4 components in new and innovative ways and devised a lifetime of legendary cocktails. So some of his specific techniques, mixing and layering multiple spices and sweeteners, even small tweaks to a recipe could yield a much different result. He also blended very dissimilar rums, providing the drinks with a complex backbone. And once you pair these unique ingredients and techniques with evocative drink names like Missionary's Downfall or Cobra's Fang, you've got the exotic cocktail. Pause for effect. So this is during the Depression where people couldn't afford to travel. But these exotic cocktails kind of provided a vacation within a glass, right? So the drinks were an immediate sensation. By 1937, Ernest had to move the business to a larger building across the street and changed the name to Don the Beachcomber and changed his own name to Don Beach. So Don with 2 N's. You've got to really believe in your business to change your name from your name to your business's name.
Right?
Yeah.
Well, he probably had everyone coming in and calling him Don anyway.
That is true. Yeah, if you name Don's, it was the original name of the bar was Don's Beachcomber, like DON''S. So yeah, I would imagine if I walk into that bar, I'm like, hey, where's Don at? But so one really interesting thing about the operation is that at the bar that was visible to guests, there was only one bartender who would quietly polish glasses and maybe mix the occasional martini. The real drinks were actually made behind the bar wall, shielded from view, and the finished drink would be sent out through a small window near the bar. This was part of the mystery and mystique, but also security measure because rival bars were constantly trying to steal Don's recipes. Scandalous. By 1940, he had sold the name and the company to his wife, who immediately got to work opening new locations across the country. And by 1948, Don the Beachcomber was doing $1.5 million in sales in 1948 money, which is $19.5 million in today's money. And that is the story of Don the Beachcomber.
So the next super formative pre-Tiki bar that the Tiki bars today can thank is, of course, Trader Vic's. So he was born Victor Jules Bergeron in California in 1902. He opened his first restaurant, a 22 by 26 one-room restaurant in Oakland in 1934, and called it Hinky Dinks.
Yeah, sorry. The best name for a bar.
Right? So it was small, but during the Depression, small and reliable was all really people needed. And Victor knew how to entertain a guest. He would sing and dance and do card tricks to keep spirits up. His bar took off, and he expanded the restaurant with some more rooms, and eventually he wondered if people might pay a bit more for something a bit more celebratory and exotic. So he and his wife went on a vacation/research trip to New Orleans and Havana, and he visited some of the most legendary bars and picked the brains of all the bartenders. Immediately upon his return, he added the drinks he had on his travels to the menu, and they were a huge hit. Around this time, word had traveled north about an exotic-themed bar in Hollywood that was getting really popular. And in 1937, Victor made his first trip to don the beachcomber and left a changed man. So Vic would forever give credit to Don in his menus and freely admits that his visit offered inspiration for what his bar was to become.
Oh, that's cool that he gave credit.
Mm-hmm. So Vic and his wife immediately started redecorating Hinky Dinks with fish nets and float lamps. He also decided that they needed a new food menu and decided that the westernized version of Chinese food would be the perfect complement to the kind of drinks he planned to serve. He was always looking for more decorations and developed a reputation for offering his guests food and drink in exchange for decorative curios. And this habit earned him a nickname that would be found above the doors of his restaurants for decades to come, Trader Vic. Vic himself wrote, "There was no fanfare about the opening, just closed one day as Hinky Dinks selling sandwiches and opened the next day as Trader Vic's selling tropical drinks and Chinese food." End quote.
Interesting.
It was a huge success, and by 1941, reporters were calling it the best restaurant in San Francisco, even though it was in Oakland, which ruffled some feathers.
I can see that being an issue.
I don't know enough about the geography of there, but I guess it's sort of like saying the best restaurant in Houston is in Cate.
Yeah, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, people from San Francisco and Oakland, but there's a bridge between the two.
Oh.
Like not a metaphorical bridge, like an actual bridge. So yes, it would be like saying the best food in downtown Houston is actually outside of Highway 6.
So, at Trader Vic's, drinks came in elaborate bowls and vases depicting island scenes. They were topped with flowers and souvenir swizzle sticks, all of which added to the experience. In 1944, everything culminated in his ultimate creation, the Mai Tai, the drink that would cement his place in history. After he opened new locations in Seattle, Beverly Hills, and San Francisco, the San Francisco location's actually where the food menu really took off, so he continued expanding on his Chinese and Asian fusion cooking, again before the term fusion cooking really existed. And he called it imaginative American food. His creative food menu made the restaurant a culinary landmark as well as a cocktail one, and this was most exemplified in Vic's own creation, the Crab Rangoon.
I love crab rangoons.
And you can get them everywhere now, and they came from this tiki bar.
Interesting. I did not know that. Also, I've never had a Mai Tai.
Well, I actually didn't include a Mai Tai could be its own episode, but the original 1944 Mai Tai that he created is not what most people picture when they think of a Mai Tai now. It kind of got evolved and devolved over the years, and most people associate it with like this big fruit juice combination kind of thing that they like you get at a swim up bar and somewhere kind of thing. But the original Mai Tai is just two different kinds of rum, usually an aged rum and a rum agricole, and lime juice, dry curacao, and orgeat.
Ooh.
Which is an almond sweet syrup. And like it's complex and delicious and refreshing and not at all sweet. Later in the episode I talk about this like Tiki drink app. I can't look it up because my phone is my camera, but he has the recipe for like the 1944 Mai Tai and then a 1953 Mai Tai and a 1976 Mai Tai and a 1985 Mai Tai, like as it evolved, all these different ones. But the original 1944 Mai Tai is delicious. If you can find a real tiki bar that sells one, they usually call it the 1944 Mai Tai on the menu, and I recommend everyone try it. It's very, very good.
We'll have to try one.
So, the next 2 decades would see this Polynesian fad thrive far beyond California. By the early 1960s, there were 25 Trader Vic's locations around the world. This expansion furthered the craze for all things tiki, especially in the states farthest from the coast, where Polynesian pop was even more foreign. The style and fad became known at this time simply as Tiki, named for the most recognizable icons of the movement. I mentioned earlier that Trader Vic's added tikis to their decor in 1955. Restaurants and bars embraced the tiki theme across the country, in places as untropical as Columbus, Chicago, and Detroit. Walt
Ooh, yeah.
Disney was also a huge fan of this aesthetic. He opened the Tahitian Terrace in Disneyland in 1962, which was a Polynesian restaurant with a full floor show. And he also opened the Enchanted Tiki Room in 1963, which is an audio animatronic show with singing birds and flowers, and it's still open in both of the U.S. parks.
Oh, awesome! I've never been to the Enchanted Tiki Room.
It is the most fun, and you can eat in it, so you can go grab a Dole Whip outside and then like sit and watch your bird show and eat your Dole Whip, and it's just the most fun.
Interesting. Well, some other things apart from the Enchanted Tiki Room that came out at the time that also fueled this tiki craze in the 50s and 60s. So the South Pacific, which is a book and a Broadway musical. Tiki, which is an Academy Award-winning documentary about Norwegian Thor Heyerdahl's expedition from Peru to Polynesia on a log raft. And Aku Aku, which was Heyerdahl's book about his travels. And all of this added to a, quote, Tiki fever, right? The new businesses used names and in imagery. Polynesian-inspired architecture was referred to as Tiki style. So things like apartments, bowling alleys, and shopping centers all began to appear with these A-frame rooflines, lava rock water features, and gas tiki torches.
The tiki craze was definitely a craze, and unfortunately, it began to fade by the end of the 1960s. By that time, the boomers were coming of age, and what once seemed like charming naivete about island cultures now seemed, to a generation raised in a more globally aware world, to be patronizing and inauthentic. Tiki bars at this point became symbolic of the establishment that the new generation was protesting against, and also its generational tradition to distance yourself from your parents' interests. By beginning in the 1970s, the mainstream culture had decided that tikis were tacky or kitsch. And one by one, the tikis fell in the name of progress and, quote, good taste.
That's very much an opinion.
Yes, it is very much an opinion. And by the early 80s, even the legendary venues started to close. Donda Beachcomber locations closed, and Trader Vic's locations began to slowly close down as well. If the tiki bars didn't close altogether, some ended up with a worse fate, a remodel. The actual phrase he used was tarted up with white stucco and pink neon. To the 80s remodels, which was basically remodeling old tiki bars into 1980s Miami-style version of the tropics. As tiki venues disappeared, so did the great tiki bartenders, often taking their recipes with them. It became harder to find new bartenders willing to make a cocktail with 11 carefully measured ingredients.
Wow.
Tiki cocktails are complex.
Yeah, no kidding. I'm more of like the one liquor and club soda kind of guy.
Yeah, no. That's why they're so good and interesting. Like, you can't get a drink like this anywhere else. And once you have them, you're hooked. Like, it ruins you for craft cocktails everywhere else, honestly. We also, at this point, saw the rise of labor-saving cocktail ingredients like sweet and sour mix, synthetic passion fruit, and new flavorless rums. So soon, most people's impression of an exotic cocktail was a brightly colored syrupy concoction that was handed to you as you stepped off the plane in Honolulu. We also saw the rise of a new tropical aesthetic worth mentioning, beach bars. So this is margaritas, simplified boat drinks, and Jimmy Buffett music, which is a simpler and more casual approach to island escapism, but is not tiki.
I am not a big beach goer, but if there is a swim up bar, I am 100% for it.
I honestly have no, like, it's not tiki, but I don't mind it. Like, the like, boat rock, margarita, toes in the sand kind of aesthetic. Like, it's like, they're kindred spirits to the tiki people, I think, because the idea is that you're, like, immersing yourself in a vacation wherever you are, and you're just, like, having a cocktail and just relaxing and trying to be transported and not think about work. and like all that stuff. It's the same thing. It's just a very different aesthetic and very different music, and like it's not Tiki, but they're friends. This is how I feel. That's how I feel about the Margaritaville aesthetic.
Well, Tiki could have disappeared forever if it weren't for a few open-minded, curious people who began to uncover the past and also to rebuild. So these, quote, Tiki revivalists were mostly amateur enthusiasts who devoted themselves to researching, documenting, and sharing everything they could. So through books, magazines, and online forums, the Tiki revivalists helped open the eyes of many to the look and feel of Polynesian pop and went a long way to dispelling the notion that it was kitsch. They did this mainly by finding old tiki mugs and menus at Goodwill and then piecing together the history forever. So in pre-internet and early internet days, this was done in person at, quote, tiki symposiums. But once the internet took off, it became a way easier to crowdsource answers to tiki mysteries and otherwise might have been never been solved.
So some notable tiki revivalists, if anyone wants to do some more research, is Sven Kirsten, who I mentioned earlier. He wrote The Book of Tiki in 1992, and he also coined the phrase Polynesian pop. Otto von Stroheim, who started a Tiki News zine in 1995, which brought the community together from all over, and it helped advertise Tiki artist bars and events that were still going on. And he later went on to form Tiki Oasis, which is still the largest annual Tiki event in the country. And then there's also Jeff Beachbum Berry, who is credited with unearthing many of the lost Tiki cocktails. He's the one who brought Don Beach out of the shadows to take his rightful place as the father of exotic cocktails. And he has several must-have Tiki cocktail books that are on my list, and a very awesome Tiki cocktail app that I mentioned earlier when we were talking about my tais. It has basically all of his research in an app, and you can put in all the ingredients you have, and it tells you which cocktails you can make. And then it tells you what ingredients you could buy to make more cocktails, and it's very addictive and fascinating, and my rum collection has quadrupled since I downloaded this app, so like just a warning.
So I went on a so in my ship cruising vacation, which I'll talk about next week. I went on a tour of a rum factory.
Fun!
In the Dominican Republic. It was the Margarix rum. But anyway, so there are a few tiki bars that still remain from the golden era, and here are some of the notable ones. So Trader Vic's in Emeryville, celebrating their 90th anniversary this August. So happy 90th anniversary to Trader Vic's.
Yay!
Tonga Hut in Hollywood, the oldest tiki bar in LA, established in 1958. And Halakahiki Tropical Lounge in the Chicago area, established in 1964. And there's been lots more bars that have opened as part of this tiki revival. So some of the few notables of the revival era are Beach Bum's Barry's Latitude 29 in New Orleans, Don the Beachcomber, old place but rebranded in Huntington Beach, California, Frankie's Tiki Room, which is open 24 hours in Las Vegas, Nevada, and the Three Dots and Dash in Chicago, Illinois.
And there are more and more tiki bars and events popping up every year, so I highly encourage you to do some Googling to see if there's anything near you, because there probably is. I'm a big fan of my local tiki bar, Swizzle Dallas. They started out with pop-up events before they opened their brick-and-mortar location, and I've been following them around since 2016. And they also host Dallas Tiki Week. So if they do it in Dallas, they probably do it where you live. So I highly encourage some Googling. Also, while researching Tiki for this episode and just for myself for fun, I discovered that there's a Tiki bar in Houston, and there's also a Tiki bar in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which are both driving distance. So they're on my list now to try out.
What's the Tiki one in Houston called?
Lalo. It's in the Heights.
In the Heights. I've been to this one.
Really?
Yeah.
What was it like? What'd you drink? When'd you
I
go?
don't remember. This was like when I was in college.
What? Heck? You weren't transfixed? You didn't leave a changed man?
Okay, so the thing was that we didn't aim to get to this bar. We were at another bar that was next to it, if I remember correctly, or nearby. Somehow we were at one bar and we're like, let's go somewhere else. And then they're like, well, what about, this one's closed. Because this would have been, either right, it was during my last year of college or like first few years out of college. So while like smartphones were a thing, the Googling of where to go next was not part of the immediate culture yet.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's like a little, if it's the same one I'm thinking about, It's like a little at the very end of a little mini mall center. So they have like you walk in and it's like very decorated like Tiki, and then they have like a little patio in the back. Surprise! I've been to Tiki bars.
So you have been to a tiki bar. Well,
Yeah.
I follow them on Instagram now, and I absolutely have to go next time I am in Houston for an extended period of time.
All right. So now that we have caught up to the present by me dropping the fact of the podcast, which was me having been to a tiki bar, I think it's time for etiquette segment. So Jackie, what do we have today?
So, since I knew that this episode was going to be kind of long, I got a really short etiquette tip today. This one is also from Emily Post's Blue Book of Etiquette from 1950, which isn't as sassy as Amy Vanderbilt, so I might switch back. I don't know. Listeners, let me know
Yeah, send us a fan mail telling us about this.
if you like having a different etiquette perspective, or if we should just do all Amy Vanderbilt all the time. But anyway, so this is from the chapter on American neighborhood customs. And this is just a short paragraph where she explains that there's an identical pattern you're supposed to follow for every sort of party. So every sort of party, a tea, a wedding, a christening, or what have you, is governed by the same rules. So the hostess always stands in the principal room of the house or within easy view of the entrance and shakes hands with each arriving guest. The guests then exchange greetings. After this, they may devote the time to dancing or playing games or looking at television or listening to music or to a speaker. If it is another kind of party, they congratulate the bride and groom or are shown the house or watch the unwrapping of the showered presents, but eventually they always go into the dining room and help themselves, or are helped to light or substantial refreshments set out upon the dining table. For between meal hour, the refreshments consist of sandwiches, cake, and tea in the afternoon, or chocolate and cake, or ice cream and cake, or bouillon and sandwiches at night. It might be noted that thick soups are an appreciated substitute for bouillon whenever other refreshments are too light. After the refreshments are concluded, the guests go home or continue dancing or playing cards or games, as the case may be. So I'm guessing this was not so much an etiquette tip as a etiquette outline, so that you can plan having people over to make it seem simple and easy to do.
I like it. I mean, I was thinking as you were reading, especially the part about the host/hostess standing in the principal room of the house or within easy view of the entrance. I was thinking that yesterday we had a couple friends over for dinner and games, and when they got to the house, I was still in the kitchen cooking. But that's because in my
well, that sounds relatable.
in my defense, okay, I knew that I had to have everything ready by 7, so I knew how long it took to make the coq au vin, and I was like, I'll just work back. And whenever it was time to start cooking, I was like, I could wait 15 more minutes, it'll be fine. And then the past Gonzalo decided that it would be a great idea to play a little bit more Fallout 4 on my Xbox. So I started cooking a little bit late.
Yeah.
I did it to myself, yes. So as they walked in, I was like thickening the sauce with a Burmani, which did not thicken as well because I didn't give it time. So anyway, long story short, I think that we should keep these.
Yeah. So basically, she narrows it down to hostess greetings, whatever planned activity there is, food, and then they leave. And I guess when you narrow it down to that, it seems like any party is achievable. So I think that's great. I like having that kind of party outlined out like that. I'm trying to dip my toes in entertaining a little bit more lately, so I've been thinking about stuff like that. And I also panic easily, so I think having it all kind of narrowed down to a very simple outline makes it seem very achievable. So I also like this etiquette tip.
Nice. Well, then let's give it the mid-century stamp of approval and say we should keep these tips. And with that, it looks like we have landed the plane. So thank you guys all for listening today. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to the show and also tell a friend.
You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. This is the best place to send us feedback and episode suggestions. You can send us a DM anytime. You can also find us on YouTube now at MCL Podcasts, which is the same handle. Before we go, last week we introduced our new fan mail feature. There's now a send us a text message option in each of our episodes, and you can use it to send us notes. Gonzalo, did we get any notes last week?
Okay, yeah. So yes, actually, we have a note Actually, it is from before we announced it, but it is from a listener in Waco, and it says, "I just discovered your show. I'm a millennial," and put in parentheses, "I was born in 1988, which was when I was born." So high five. Uh, and then it says, "But I live and breathe mid-century stuff. So great to find a show that's all about it." So you can't see me, but I'm waving at you. Hello.
Thanks, friend. So, listeners, if you'd like us to read your note on the show, then send us a text message.
So thanks, guys, for listening. We'll talk to you again next week.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Mid-Century Living. Please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave a review. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. See you next Friday.